Welcome to the Old Dogs New Tricks panel. We're going to give people a minute or two here to fill the room. So as you're coming in, if you want to say hello to us in the chat so we know you've made it okay, go ahead and do that. And then we'll introduce everyone and start talking. Oh, there's Crystal, Bob, Pamela. Pamela's pretty excited for this panel. We got 2 exclamation points. Nice.
And a smiley face.
And a smiley face. There you go. Just so you guys know, as you're coming in, I'm the moderator, and I will be keeping an eye on both the Q&A and the chat. So I'll do my best to kind of have 2 brains running as I moderate and keep an eye on that. But yeah, as you come in, if, there will be questions, Q&A at the end, so we'll address those at the end. But if you want to chat with each other, that's what the chat window is for. So cool. I still see a couple people filling in here. We'll give them 1 more minute before we get going to make sure everyone is in here. Yeah, filling up nicely. Great. All right. Excellent. So why don't we'll start with some introductions and just kind of we'll go around the horn here, and maybe you can tell everyone on the webinar who you are, what you write, and where you are in the world. I think that might be a good way to kick off our conversation. So why don't we start with Julie?
Absolutely, thank you. My name is Julie Czerneda. I'm a science fiction and fantasy author published by Daw Books. My 21st novel came out in August. That's a science fiction novel. Thank you, thank you. It's lovely to be doing this. I'm expecting to learn a lot at this panel because I'm always looking for new ways that other authors have found things, because organizing is a big deal. I got to also know I'm mirroring, so I have to know to reach the other side. And I am located just outside of Ottawa, Canada.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Let's kick it over to AT next.
Hi, I'm AT Greenblatt. I am a short story writer, doing sci-fi fantasy, trying horror. Not much success yet, but I won a Nebula this year, which was amazing. I've been published in Uncanny, A Clock's World, Beneath the Skies, and have stories coming out in Lightspeed and Asimov's, and I live outside Philadelphia.
Great. All right. Thanks, AT. Let's go to Bob next.
Hey, Bob Angell here. I write under RR Angell. I've been around a while. I do mostly short stories, do literary, science fiction, fantasy, one horror a long time ago. And my first novel came out last year, which was an LGBTQYAAIVR thriller, romantic thriller.
Nice. Is it
best game ever.
Yeah, subtitled Alphabet Soup, or?
That's right.
Actually, all those letters, that was the title of the book.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Thanks, Bob. And Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Silver, a short story writer. Actually, I realized yesterday was the 12th anniversary of my first published story appearing. And earlier this year, I published my first novel, After Hastings. It's an alternate history novel. And I'm coming to you from the suburbs of Chicago. But my daughter goes to school in Pittsburgh, so I told her that since I was virtually attending a convention in Pittsburgh this weekend, I would virtually be taking her out to dinner, and I just Venmo'd her the money for dinner tonight.
That sounds pretty cool. Excellent. I'm Jay Thorn. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, but I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, so that's a little connection there. I'm an independently published author. I've been doing it since 2009. I've published about 25 or 30 novels. I'm a full-time writer and editor. So I'm excited because I'm so fascinated by short story writing and selling those in process. And we got a lot of short story people on the panel. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to talk about process in this panel. We're going to talk about what do you do when you come up with an idea? How do you develop it? How do you take it to a draft? And maybe if there's time, even beyond that, what do you do once you have a story that's as good as you can make it? So I thought maybe a good way we could start is to have each of our panelists talk about the ways that what do you do when you come up with an idea? That's a good place to start. I know if you're like me, you probably get people that come up to you all the time and say, oh, you're a writer. I've got this great idea for you. And I'm like, no, thanks. I've got 75 from this morning that I'm never going to get to. But when you find that one that's really going to work or that one that you're really excited about, what do you do next? So I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but does anyone want to volunteer to go first? Just kind of raise your hand and we'll just kind of go, yeah, okay, good, Jolie, thanks.
I'll go first. I file it. The minute you said that, I said, I know what this is where this is going, because, not only is that because I'm writing something else always at the time, so I can't let a new wonderful shiny thing come in my face and take over much as it would like to, but I don't want to lose it, and I don't want to lose that excitement about it. So I do put it away. I have beside me is a very large filing cabinet, and it's full. So if I need ideas, I'm going to run out. If I know it's going to be a book-sized idea, I typically will start putting it into a props at hand, a journal, and I will keep that going for, however long it takes, just putting things in or box it. But for me, they're precious, but they have to be under control, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do they get from your initial sort of filing system? How do they move up in the hierarchy to where you're going to work on them? Do you bring them into the computer at any point? Do you index card them? What happens next?
I'm far less organized than that. I have piles. I have folders. I have things like this. If it's weird biology, I just gather it all because I know I'll use it in my science fiction. It's different for fantasy. For fantasy, it's more, I get a little precious, and I have a little precious book, and I put little precious things in it, and I took it away. And so it's a little different. Fantasy.
Cool. All right. How about you, AT? What do you do for that idea that burns in your head, and then what do you do with it next?
So like Julie, I'm usually working on another project at a time because I usually have like five different things going on at any given time. I used to write everything down, and I don't have a good system. This is my system. Everything just goes in there as grocery lists are in there and everything, to-do lists. So it's chaos for me, but I find the ideas that are worth keeping stay in my head, because I found that some of the notes I was writing myself were just kind of nonsense. I would also send myself emails, and some of them were okay, and some of them not so much. But yeah, over time I've become a lot less precious, if that made sense. And the ones I really want to hang on to, I would start writing the opening for it to hopefully kind of cement the idea.
That's such an interesting thing, because I remember when I first started, especially with novels, I would keep a little notebook beside my bed, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would write stuff down, and I thought, oh my, that's gold. Like, that's going to make me $1 million. And I look at it in the morning and I'm like, it's like milk and cookies +5. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means,
Yep.
But I like your idea, because I started trusting myself and thought, you know what, I'm not going to write it down anymore. Like, it'll come back to me. It'll kind of, it'll, if it's a really good idea, it'll come back. So that's an interesting process that you have. I like that.
It doesn't work for everyone, but it seems to work really for me.
So. Good. How about you, Stephen? You got a lot of books on that shelf there. Are you writing ideas down?
Well, I do. Usually what happens is when I have an idea, I scribble it down on whatever pad of paper happens to be closest to me. And then that piece of paper will migrate into the study where I am now. I'll open up a new file for it, type in the general idea, type in where I think it's going to go, and then I let it gestate, as Julie and AT have said that they do also. And as I think about it, if I come up with anything, if I come up with any resources that I know I'm going to have to track down, I'll open up the file and I'll type in notes. I'll type in clues for myself where I think the story is going to go. So I'm kind of building it in the file. And then AT also said that she starts to write things down, starts the story to see if there's anything going on there. And a lot of times I'll start writing the first couple paragraphs just so that I have a basis for when I'm ready to approach the story. It might all get tossed at some point. I also make sure that I have notes about where I expect the story to end, because I have found that if I do not have an ending in mind, I'm just writing words. I need to I may not hit that ending. I may veer off at some point, which I love because I enjoy being surprised by my writing also. But if I don't have an ending in mind when I start, I know that I'm just putting words on paper, and it might be useful at some point, but it's not going to turn into a story. Jay, I'm not getting any sound from you.
You're muted, Jay. Nope.
The sound is not coming through.
I can read your lips.
He's saying he's the
1
moderator
minute.
and in charge.
Yes.
He's saying, Bob, it's your turn. What do you do?
I think he is. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I'll go. Jay, I don't know what's going on, but I'll fill time for you. So I do something a little similar. When I get ideas, I kind of grab them and then I stuff them into, I use Evernote now. I used to, when I was coding back in the 80s, I created a database, the Brain of Bob, and then I migrated over to Yohimbo, and now I switched over to Evernote. Anyway, so I have this giant file just full of here's a story idea, and I write a little bit about it, and then I leave it alone. And then I'll go back to whatever I'm working on. And so that puts it in my brain, and if it floats up again, a little bit like what you guys were saying, if it floats up again, then I kind of pay attention to it and say, oh, there may be something here. And then I'll, think about it a little more. And if it floats up again, and I think, well, I think I've got to do something with this, then I'll open up a file in Scrivener and start something there. And if I start collecting, if I really get into it, I start collecting data on it. I'll open up a file that, or a dialogue with myself, and I'll have this really crazy schizophrenic discussion with myself about what is this? Is this a good character? Is this character really, trying to do what he's trying to do, or she's trying to do, or they, or whatever, and kind of just work on it from there.
I think I should, if I may.
Yeah.
For me, there's a distinction between the cool factoid bits and world building and intriguing, wonderful things you find, and I always keep those. And then there's the ideas that, as you said very well, Lisa, they don't leave you. You wake up in the night, you want to write them down, or you just know you have to go there. And you're right, those ideas, I don't think I've ever written one of those down. It absolutely is, I'm collecting data, and it's going to be used for the idea that's brewing. Yeah, you've clarified for me, that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it really is I'm feeding my intuition about it. Mm. And if my intuition is saying, you're going to write this, it's going to collect things, and eventually it's going to just well up. It's going to create this magma chamber underground, and all of a sudden it'll just go boop, right up to the surface and say, here, you got to pay attention to me.
Subconscious is really good at stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the shower.
Yep.
Right where you don't have the pen.
Right.
Go ahead, Jay. Can we hear you?
Can you sing? No,
Still
Jay
No,
can't
not
sing.
yet.
He's lost his voice.
Well-
Oh, Kevin.
I think
Kevin,
Jay's going to try to
help.
rejoin us.
I think he's going to restart.
Yes.
I'm here.
Ah.
He's going to come back.
I assume that he's going to jump back in. Hopefully
Jay
that
or
will
Kevin?
reset his
This is Kevin.
Mike.
Kevin, hey, we lost Jay. He's lost his voice.
I saw him with the microphone in front of him. I had muted because we're addressing another fire here. And
Okay.
Yeah,
but,
he does.
So anyway, he jumped out. So maybe what we'll do is just self-tail for a while.
Right. Yeah. He says he's going to come
We
back
don't
in a
bore
few
the-
moments.
Yeah.
yes, I would
Well,
hope that he.
I can also
I-
take off the next question. If that's
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go for
so
it.
we all have these ideas. How do we make them become stories?
Ah!
Always the challenge
With a
of a
whip.
good writer.
Okay, let's see. There's Heart of Newt.
Oh, that's the hard part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes you get, if I may, you just, it's almost like you could see the movie in your head. And then there's this annoying part about actually having to write it. And I wish I could just dump sometimes, because sometimes it just seems like I've got this whole image of what this story will, maybe not how it'll end, but just how it unfolds and what kind of tone it has and the emotion it has. And then you're writing, people walk into a room and the curtains are purple. There's a big disconnect between the big idea and the work.
Right. And I actually find that depending on what I'm writing, my process of getting that story out can be very different. If I'm doing something that's more historical based, as I'm doing the research, the stories are coming to me. I'm currently working on something that I started to do the research and I realized that was going to be more research than I was ready to put in right now. But there was this small little bit that kind of hinted at a different story, which is the direction I wound up going in. And of course, as I'm doing the research, I'm taking notes and I'm figuring out where the story is and what the story is and what I'm going to do with all these people. Other things that I write, I like I said, I have to know the ending, and it's just a matter of getting them down on paper and, moving it through and, get the basic plot down first and then figure out where I'm fleshing it out and, how the characters are going to be influencing their, what happens.
Yeah, for me, people always ask me where I get my ideas from, and I find it's kind of a lie in some ways because it's never just one idea for me. It's like 5 all coming together to kind of create this thing that has, that's not just, about going from point A to point B, but to also have an interesting setting or interesting protagonist, and it's not, for me, if sometimes I have an initial idea and then once I start working on it, I'll be like, well, that's boring. I've read stories like this before. What else can I do? And then I will start playing around with it. For me at least, I also need to kind of have an ending in mind, though it takes me a long time to kind of earn the ending, if that makes sense. Like, I'll have a rough draft, I give it to my friends, and they'll be like, yeah, it's good, but the ending doesn't quite click yet, and it'll take a lot of time for me to earn that. But I don't know about you guys, but the rough draft, the first draft, is like the worst for me. Something about staring at a blank page, having to create something from that blank page.
It varies. Like I've said before, I do need to have the ending in mind, but another thing that is really good is a deadline. I mean, somebody in this panel, who I'm not going to name, but her initials are JC, once did reach out to me and said, I have an opening in a book. I'll consider your story if you can get it to me on Monday. And she said this to me on, I think, Thursday night. So, it really kind of focuses you, to sit down and get the words down and figure out the story very quickly if you have a firm deadline. Now, 4 days usually isn't, the firm deadline I'm looking for, but I was able to get a story to her in that time.
And you did.
So.
Now, fear's a good one.
Pardon?
Fear of timeline is a good one, yeah.
So now, does anybody still use Post-it notes on the wall for plotting things out? I actually stopped doing that when I pulled the Post-it notes off and they took off part of the paint. And my wife got very upset. We never actually repainted the wall, but we did hang a lot of pictures on that wall.
Ah,
Oh,
Post-it notes, but Roger made me a hanger so they hang in front of my bookcase.
oh, nice. That's
Oh, I
cool.
like that.
Yeah. And then I can cover them up when people visit so they can't see the plot. It depends on the book. That was a very technical, every bit must match because it was the middle book of a series. Normally, I don't need to do quite that much.
I was always into spreadsheets, so spreadsheets work for me just much better than Post-it notes.
Yeah, I was going to say, since you're using Evernote and Scrivener, you know, you're right in there with the electronic tools. Do you use electronics for your entire process? Because we saw that Julie has her notebooks and AT has her notebooks, and I move things into an electronic format at some point. But when you're plotting,
Yeah, no, I do it all. I pretty much have moved everything over the years right into Scrivener. So I don't really use the post. They have like a little Post-it storyboard kind of thing, and I don't use that. What I do is I'll sit down and I'll think of. I mean, first off, I have to figure out the character, especially the main character, and you know what's going to happen, and then I kind of get the general idea of where the story is going, and I'll take a crack at putting down a bunch of hey Jay, I'll take a crack at putting down a bunch of scenes that will sort of get me there, sort of like moments throughout the, you know, scenes within the story that sort of have to get me from the beginning to the end. And then I'll start to flesh out the, you know, each scene individually. Sometimes they get moved around, sometimes they get deleted, sometimes I move them, you know, away and then bring them back. I try not to throw anything away. If I've written anything, like if I want to get rid of a paragraph, I'll just drag it into a different file so that it's there just in case I want to go back to it. But
I do that too.
yeah.
I delete, I toss. But it's interesting that you say that because I realize one of the things I do is if I'm typing, I am writing the story. I'm writing words that I ultimately hope will be in the finished product, whether I delete half of them or not. When I'm taking notes by hand, or I'm actually, you know, gathering books and annotating the books that I'm using as research material. And I think it's because I just don't want to use the tool for more than the creative process. For me, that's what works. It's interesting because I tried Scrivener, and I just put it aside and I just started writing. So it wasn't a tool for my way of doing it. But it is very powerful.
okay, so Julie,
Well,
it sounds
I
like
didn't use it right away either the first time because it was, you know, there's a kind of a steep learning curve, even though say it's like super easy, but it's taken me like probably 15 years to get to the point where I'm like pretty much all in Scrivener.
Okay, so Julie, it sounds like you're doing your first draft on the computer. I assume that Bob does also. AT, do you also do your drafts on the computer? Or?
It depends. Sometimes I start them by hand and finish them on the computer. If I'm on a deadline, I usually skip the writing by hand opening.
Okay.
Do all computer. Yeah, I find for me when I get stuck, I go back to by hand. For some reason, that helps me get unstuck. But yeah, mostly it's all computer. I still use Microsoft Word.
I use Microsoft Word also.
But I'm writing short stories, so I feel
I
like
can't think. Yes.
I
Okay,
use Microsoft Word as the launch pad, but you know, so you extract from Scrivener into Microsoft Word, and then that's the way you submit.
Okay.
So.
Jay, can you say something?
Yeah, I tried.
Oh.
Nothing.
We can hear you.
Oh, you
Got
can
you.
hear me?
We can
Oh,
hear
good.
You're really faint, but we
Really?
can hear you.
Don't mess with anything.
It's got to be Zoom. Like I don't something with Zoom because I tested all. I came out, tested everything, and it was fine. And
Turn up the gain.
I don't have any left.
We can hear you.
All right, sorry. I'm so sorry.
that's not your fault. It happens.
Yep. Welcome back.
All right. So do you want me to? You're talking drafts now, right?
Yeah.
Idea to paper, idea to type. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. So do we want to start getting into revisions maybe?
Sure.
What are revisions?
What's Look, I mean, what's the process? Anyone want to volunteer their revision process? Maybe we can start there. Like, do you have a certain method you use every time?
I just finished mine, so I'm very happy. Revision. Well, my process is basically that I hear back from my editor, and she will, like Sheila Gilberta Daw, and she will point out typically, I'll have about 2 pages of notes from our phone call, and they are content. So things like, I didn't see that coming, so do you want to put some background in that part? Did you gloss over this a bit too fast for me? Or I really love this part, could we see more of that character, that kind of thing. And then I will address those as I go through and fix what I myself see. But I don't ever tend to revise in the sense of changing the actual story or the plot arc or who's in it. It's more the polish for me. So that's my process with it. And it's all just went in last week.
That's awesome. Well done.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. How about you, Stephen? You kind of chuckled when Julie said, you said, revision. What's that? So tell us about that.
Okay, I have a horrible revision process, which is essentially as I'm writing it, I actually turn out first drafts that I'm pretty happy with, but I revise as I'm writing. So as the story is moving on, if I realize I don't like what I do, I'm more than happy to delete words, go back and, basically do the last save point, if you will, and rewrite from that point as I'm going through it. Most of my revisions wind up coming after my first readers take a look at it. I'll give copies to some people who I trust, get their feedback, and a lot of times it's, I didn't understand what was going on here, or they think something's happening that I did not intend. So I just, then go through and revise it to clarify those things in my mind. The next round of revisions usually is when it comes back from the editor, and they've provided their notes, like Julie said with Sheila. They send it back. I look through. I figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense to me. Try to answer their questions and turn in something that their next thing that they send me is going to be, "Thank you very much. Here's your money."
Nice. How many revisions do you go through, Bob?
I do a little bit of a mixture between Stephen and E.T. and Julie. What I do is I go through and a lot of times I'll start the writing process in the day by kind of going through and mucking about with what I did the day before, and then sort of using that as a launch pad to continue. But when it's all done, I've learned a long time ago to overwrite. So I put down as much detail as I can, as much stuff as I can about the character, about the scene, about the setting, anything. And then when it's all said and done, I can go back and my revision is more of a subtraction kind of thing. So like everything's there. So if I'm looking for the right word or the phrase, it's pretty much kind of in there already. I just have to work it out. So it's easier to compress things down than if you need something to add back, if you follow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's absolutely that's absolutely wonderful, because I do the exact opposite. I underwrite.
Oh.
I'm all about getting the dialogue and the action, and I might even put in a placeholder like describe cool place and fly past it. And then I go back, and one of the things I love doing in revision is where's the sense here? Is there enough sense of place? If I looked over my shoulder, is there something interesting I can add in here? So I always add words at the revision stage instead of take away. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I learned it from the past 6 months. I've been sort of wrapping up a collection of short stories that I've been working on for probably over 27 years now. And there's a collection of linked short stories, and it's based on my life growing up gay in America and the society that it was in the 60s and the 70s with, in a Southern family that was in the North, and just, there was a lot of intersections. So there were just a ton of things that I wrote and rewrote and just added. And when I got down and I started polishing off a couple of the stories, I realized that this was this was gold, because I had put down just so much, because it was like my memory going in. And then I had to go through and extract, take the X-Acto knife and extract the story out of what was really there. And it worked beautifully.
How about you, AT? Are you on underwriter, overwriter, in the middle?
I actually usually net about zero with rewriting because I am a big revisionist. I really sometimes I can get a story done in 3 drafts, but that is extremely rare for me. I end up doing anywhere from like 5 to 20 sometimes. The novel I had in Uncanny this year, I jokingly labeled one of the last revisions I did on it revision 5 million because I've been through a lot of drafts. So I for me, what I count draft as every time I give it to beta readers to give me feedback on. Like every time I present it to an audience, even though it's a small audience. And I'm usually lately it's always been to try to earn my ending and to make everything click. And then I have a really good critique group, and they'll call me out, and every time I slip on something, or they tell me what works too, but so it's so the second draft is trying to get the story into a better shape. The third draft is trying to shape it even more. It's I'm usually taking the exact knife to the parts that don't add much to the story, or when I realize the story's kind of underlying themes have changed, I'll start rewriting that. I always need to go back and add more emotion, more character depth, because at least in my first drafts, they all kind of move like stick figures.
Yeah.
So yeah, I it's funny because I usually net zero a little bit above my rough draft, but yeah, it takes a lot of revisions for me to get it right. Usually.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I so love hearing about other writers' process because we all do things differently, and it's really what works for you is all that matters. But you always find these little things that you try. And what on my last novel, my manuscript, one of my mentors said, "I want you to write it as dialogue only." And I had never tried writing a story that way. And the reason he said it was because he's like, "I want you to write a screenplay at the same time. Maybe we can shop both around." And I had never approached it that way before. And in a way it was scary, but in another way I learned so much because I was kind of forced out of my normal process. So have any of you ever been writing or revising a certain way and then sort of radically changed it? Or is it more of an iterative process where it changes over time?
I was very happily writing a science fiction novella that I've been asked to by Eric Flint. And at one point in our email, he made it clear that, did I not realize it was fantasy? And I went, so that was a very drastic and a shift. I really only kept the underlying intent of the story. I could do that. The theme of the story could still work as a fantasy story versus science fiction. Everything about the approach had to change. And that was hard. That was difficult. It was worth doing and uncomfortable, as you say, but worth doing.
Yeah, and anyone else had any sort of major changes in process like that?
I once threw away the novel and rewrote it.
Oh, tell us about that.
So I started my first novel in 1992 and finished it in about late 1995, and or early 1996. And then I kind of shopped it around. I went through the revisions and whatnot and shopped it around, and it got a little traction here and there, but it didn't sell. Nobody picked it up. And so then I, of course, had to get back to my, regularly scheduled life, working, making money, that kind of stuff. So I tinkered with it from here and there. And then many, many, many years later, after I attended Clarion West, I befriended a guy named Frank Robinson, who just became a wonderful mentor. And he's just a fantastic guy. And I showed him a couple of things that a couple of novels that I had written, and he was like, this one, you know, you should look at this one. And so basically I took all but the main character and a couple of the other characters, and because it was very technology based, it's a virtual reality based novel. And this is the one that was published last year. And I basically kind of chucked it and took it out of like the junior high realm and put it in college, and you know, put a whole new virtual reality concept together with new technology and the whole bit, because you know, you got to update stuff. And so I literally threw everything away except kept a couple characers.
Wow.
And it worked out very well.
Yeah.
But it was rich because I had done it before. You know, I had all this stuff. And
so when you say you threw it out, you rewrote it, retyped it. You weren't like copying, pasting sections over. You completely rewrote it.
now it's totally different technologies
Oh yeah, yeah.
that people were growing up. That you know, the couple of characters were no longer neighbors and married. They were college professors and you know, other things. And yeah, it was totally different environment, completely different story.
So Bob, it was the same characters that you wrote the original book about, just at a different point in their life?
One of the characters, I just really liked Robbie. I really liked this guy. And he spoke to me a lot. I think he had a little bit of me in him. And he wasn't gay in the beginning, but he needed to be gay. And so, I mean, he absolutely had to be out. And so, yes. And so that was the other big thing. So there are some things that are coming out, because the novel is kind of a serial, and some of the stuff that was going on in outer space in the first novel are going to show up in the third novel. So, which is yet to be written. In fact, the second one is about to be started. But
Well,
When I
cool.
wrote my first fantasy novel, I threw out, I think my count was, it came out at 425,000 words of it I threw out. And it was basically because I wanted to not write like a science fiction writer. I wanted to have the language and the landscape. And so I would write 20,000 words and I would delete them. And I would write another 30,000 words and I would delete them. And it was the same story and the same characters. It was just, I could just feel that it wasn't there. And my publisher was extremely patient, because I usually turn out a book a year, and this one took me 3. But you learn by doing these things, and you get a much better story by doing these things, but it's terrifying. I'm sure you felt that when you started. What do you mean throw it out? No, it is. It's worth doing.
I tell people when people ask me for advice, I say always try new things, because even if you fail, that's okay, because you learn the most from failing to pull something off in a story than you do from succeeding. And I mean, like Jay said, we learn from trying new things.
Mm-hmm.
yes.
So.
What's challenging about that is trying new things is not fun, and it's often painful. So,
Yeah.
you know, but you're right. That's what you kind of have to do. That's what learning is. Learning isn't comfortable. But that's the point. So, yeah.
I will say it doesn't have to be super drastic, like writing completely changing genres. It could be as simple as trying a new point of view, or a new type of character, or a new setting, but taking on those big projects where I'm like, I'm going to write. For me, it's been trying to figure out how to do horror, because that's something I don't know how to do yet. And yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
But it's also been kind of fun.
It's horror. It's supposed to be scary.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I realized a minute after I said that, I was like, oh.
Nice setup.
Nice, yeah. Well,
October.
I'm keeping my eye on the Q&A. I don't see anything in there, and there's one or two.
Actually, if you back up, Leslie had a good question in the chat.
Yeah, so I was going to ask people. I got one more quick question I want to go around the horn on, and then we'll go to Q&A. So now's the time. If you want to drop a question, either in the question and answer or in the chat, I'm looking at both. We'll get to those. But before we do that, I think sort of one last one to kind of come full circle here. Maybe we can each talk about how do you know when your story is quote unquote done, and whatever that means for you, whether that means sending it to the agent, sending it to the editor, publishing it. Like, how do you? We've talked about the idea and the drafting and the revision. So how do you know it's done? Who would like to go first for that?
I can do it.
All right.
For me, I'll preface this by saying for a long time I didn't know when a story was done. And one of the biggest problems I had getting published was that I was sending things out too early. So I don't have now I got to the point where I could send out a story and usually on the first or second try it gets accepted, which is amazing. But it's for me, it kind of developed as an instinct, but I base that instinct off of when I look at a story and there's nothing more I can think of doing to make it better. Like if I of course you go pick out words, like you could always pick out individual words. But if I'm reading through it and there's nothing that kind of jars me, or I get to the end, I'm like, okay, yeah, I think I try to imagine myself as someone coming to it the first time, which is really hard to do when you've read it like 50 billion times. But I try to keep that in mind that, like, if I was reading this for the first time, like, would this all make sense to me? Would does anything slow down? I always say the ending, but the ending is a really big one, especially for short stories.
Yeah.
And if I do that final way through and there's nothing that really kind of jumps out at me, that's, to me, I'm like, okay, let's try the editors of the short story markets to see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Sorry.
Hey, Julie, go ahead. Yeah. How do you know it's end?
For me, there's two stages of that. I started writing fiction for myself, and I was never going to show anyone else. I was writing nonfiction, and fiction was my hobby. So for me, there's the point at which the story satisfies me, and that's done. And then is the story ready to show anybody else, which I had to actually learn to do, because I'd written all kinds of things before I'd showed anybody else. I was, far I think Sheila was the second person to ever read my first novel. So it was something I hadn't learned how to do, and I eventually did. So for me now, I try to anticipate everything that she's ever asked of me in the way of revision, everything I've ever not liked in a story. I try to make sure I fix that. And I know it won't be perfect, but I also go by time. And how much time do I have to go from the story is done to tell, I've told the story I want to tell. Is it ready for someone to read? That's a different process, but that's where deadline comes in. And I make sure I build that. I set my own timelines, and that does help. I know how much time I'll need to fix things and tidy up. But short stories are terrifying. I've written short stories, and every time it's almost like you're writing a novel, but you have so little space. And it's a great tribute to you all.
Yeah. How about you, Stephen? How do you know you're done?
This is where my first readers really come in a big way. As AT said, you've read this thing over and over and over again. You know it. You know what you're trying to get across, and when you read what you think is the finished version, if it tells the story that you think you're telling, you think it's done. And then you give it to somebody else, and they come back with questions, and it's not as done as you thought it was. It's getting that fresh set of eyes on it to show you the holes that you left in there that you have to fill in, cover up, gloss over, and sand down. And then when you find a reader who actually reads it, understands it, and any questions or comments that they make are no longer pertinent to the story that you're trying to tell, that's when I know that it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. How about you, Bob?
I like to, I get to the point where I think it's done, like to the first part of Stephen's done. And then I stick it in a drawer and forget about it for a month or two or three or whatever, and then try and come back to it and see, well, is it ready? Sometimes I'll like jump the gun and I'll send it out, hoping that, maybe it's so close that an editor will say, yeah, I want this, but here's a couple of the changes. But and it'll get bumped, if that happens. But yeah, I think I'm forgetting about it and then going back and going, oh yeah, okay, well, what's going on here, and just looking at it with fresh eyes really does help me.
Yeah, lets it kind of simmer back there for a little bit.
Yeah,
So.
Yeah.
and that means you got to be working on something else really intensely in order for that to happen. So.
Yeah, I found the gaps between drafts really, really important.
Yeah, definitely that space. Well, gang, we have about 5 minutes, so I thought what I'll do is we have a few questions. There's no way we're going to answer everyone can answer all of them, so maybe I'll just kind of rapid fire toss them at you and see what you think. So, Stephen, I was wondering if maybe you could answer this one for Leslie. Do you have problems with your stories going off into a direction you don't want? And do you have a way of keeping the story on a fairly straight line without going too wild?
I don't view it as having a problem with it. I view it as my subconscious telling me something about the story that I haven't solved yet. In the novel that I had come out, I wrote in a character who served a very specific purpose. He was there to give another character some information, and then he was going to disappear. And I knew what he did after he left the scene, and he literally, was not going to have any more impact on the story. I was really surprised when he showed up a chapter later and tried to murder one of my main characters. But I also realized that that's what he would do. That was the right thing. I had built up the character enough in my subconscious that he was telling me, I'm not going away quietly, dude. This is my job. So in that case, it kind of gets back to your question earlier about taking the story in a different direction, and it took the story in a different direction.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So I've learned to listen to that voice, and I just assume that it's me telling myself what should happen.
Yeah. Excellent. This one's for you, Bob. I'm paraphrasing Pamela's question. I think she's asking about the soggy middle. She says she knows the beginning and the ending of the story, but how do you get through the middle? That's what she's trying to figure out.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people have problems with that, and Frank, my buddy Frank Robinson said, yeah, that's really the hardest time. He said, it's easy with the first part, it's easy with the end part because you kind of know how you want it to wrap up, but it's the middle part, spreading it out. Pacing is is a good word for the middle. Pacing through all of the different things that have to happen. To keep the reader energized, keep reading, to get to the part where they can get on that final treadmill to the end. So yeah, you just got to do it. And there's a lot of revision that goes in there. But I don't have too many problems with that. I sometimes I try to shoot for like a novel length of 90 to 100,000 words. Like kind of the old school numbers. And, if it kind of goes over, I want to cut down. It just flows. You have the characters and they're pulling you along. And sometimes they do weird things that you didn't expect, like she was asking, it just, you kind of spiral off in a different direction, but you're usually working with 2 or 3 story threads anyway. And so you're just kind of weaving them together. So I would suggest you're working with a few story threads, in there, and that's the middle is where you're weaving them together and sort of like slowly tying them together a little more closely so that the braid comes out into the little, the hair at the end, at the final knot.
Right. Awesome. I think we have time for one more quick answer. So I'm going to throw this to Julie and AT. Claudia wants to know if you are a discovery writer, or at least a discovery writer in part.
AT?
Me, absolutely. I'm a complete pantser. I usually do have an ending kind of goal in mind, but how I get there is I have no idea. So
that's a yes for you.
Yes. How about you, Julie?
It depends on the book. It depends on the story. I am more willing to take chances with short fiction because the consequences of going the wrong direction are, you know, like a month or 8 weeks, and a novel you're talking 9 months or more. So I'm a little bit more that way, especially in a series book. But when I'm writing a standalone, I like that discovery. I don't necessarily know the ending. I know the question I'm asking, and I want to answer that question as I write, if that makes sense. So I usually have a sense of the tone of the ending by about halfway through. But so as appropriate, I'm a discovery writer. How's that?
Nice. Great.
Wrap
That's
it
a
up.
great way to end it. I just want to thank all of the panelists. Apologies. I don't know what the audio problem was. I'm glad I was able to come back in and finish with you all. It was lovely hearing your great advice, and I learned a lot. So thank you. And thanks to everyone, all the attendees. So I think that'll wrap up Old Dogs and New Tricks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you,
It was
Jake.
wonderful.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks, everybody, for
Thank
coming.
you, everyone.